You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, I have a treat, really a treat for you. Gregg Carlstrom, the brilliant Middle East correspondent for The Economist, is back. He is based in Dubai. The last time we talked, he was in Riyadh. I think, Gregg, you're in Washington today?
I am. That's correct.
Yeah. I hope you can help we poor Americans become a little less confused about what's going on in that part of the world, because the information we have here is just, I don't even know how to characterize it. The president tells us in the same post that he's in charge of the Strait of Hormuz, and yet without pausing, he says, and without irony, Iran has to open it or else. Okay. He tells us we won the war, and now that he's considering bombing Iran to oblivion again. What is the status of this conflict?
Well, I'm not sure I'm any less confused than you are. I've been in Washington for the week to do meetings with exactly with officials, with diplomats, with people on the Hill, and the prevailing sense here is confusion as well. I mean, I think we are, in a sense, we're in the same place that we have been since the ceasefire took hold on April 8th. That was meant to buy some time for talks about a deal to end the war. It was a ceasefire. It was an agreement to keep talking about an agreement. What's being discussed now, almost 2 months later, what's being reported over the past few days, is what's being described as a letter of intent between America and Iran. That is what they are negotiating right now. That is not a final agreement. That will not deal with the outstanding issues around Iran's nuclear program. It's unclear how much sanctions relief the U.S. is prepared to offer in that agreement. It would effectively just be an extension of the ceasefire to buy more time to try and work out those details. It does seem as if we're getting close, perhaps, to that framework agreement. But again, that's not a comprehensive war-ending deal that resolves all of the outstanding issues between the U.S. and Iran.
Okay, so and you said it. The issues that you listed were the sanctions relief and the nuclear material. There's also this discussion of tolling, maybe with Oman at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz. Is that also on this list?
It's been discussed, and the Iranians continue to insist on this toll booth mechanism. The Americans continue to reject that idea, as do many other countries, the Arab countries in the Gulf, European countries, just about everyone rejects this idea. I think in practice, it's going to be very hard for Iran to enforce such a mechanism without the consent of Oman, which you mentioned. It's the country yes. on the other side of the Strait of Hormuz. The usual shipping lanes through the strait go through Omani territorial waters, not through Iranian territorial waters. So to charge tolls in peacetime, you would need Oman's consent. Now, they have spoken to the Iranians about this idea. They've had some meetings over the past few months, but I find it very hard to believe that they would actually go along with it, because the reaction from their neighbors in the Gulf, from other countries, would be furious. So I think what's more likely to happen is this toll booth concept it's a negotiating ploy for Iran. It's something that might not even be workable in practice, but it's something that they can trade for American concessions, perhaps more extensive sanctions relief, things like that.
Okay, so the discussions going on today, I guess, are about whether we will have a letter that determines the shape of future negotiations on these points that you've outlined, or whether we are going to once again aim at a target list. Is that right?
That's correct. Now, it feels like we've been here before, because just about every week since the ceasefire started, we've heard reports that Donald Trump was close to approving another round of airstrikes and then backed down at the last minute for some reason or another. But I think the longer this goes on, this stalemate that we've been in for almost 2 months, the more unsustainable it becomes for everyone.
The whole world.
You look at for the whole world, exactly. The damage to the global economy from the energy shock caused by the war, also the damage to the Iranian economy that's being caused by this American blockade of Iranian shipping. And so there will come a point at which the Trump administration needs to make a decision, either carry out another round of strikes, hoping that somehow achieves what the previous one did not, or make what is likely to be a very unsatisfying deal that Trump is going to be absolutely beaten up for in Washington. But those are the two choices at this point. And again, we're getting to a point where he really needs to make a decision soon.
And at the beginning of this conflict, you and I talked about the other resources that flow through that waterway, oil and natural gas for sure, but also helium and fertilizers. You've talked about the financial shock because of the energy prices, but are we beginning to see the downstream impacts of these other commodities not going through? Are we seeing a problem with agriculture now that the planting season is here and gone in places? Are we seeing trouble in high-tech manufacturing because of the helium? What do you know about the other impacts?
We're starting to see all of these things. Now, they haven't yet led to significantly higher prices or to shortages, but I think all of that is probably coming at some point. You mentioned farmers who have had to make a choice as they have planted their crops this spring, whether to either use less fertilizer or pay significantly more for fertilizer. And so once those crops go to market, in the summer or the autumn, we're going to see, I'm sure, that pass through into higher food prices. You have manufacturers who produce all sorts of things that rely on plastic. Of course, plastic is derived from oil. And so you've had factories that have had to shut down in China and other parts of Asia because they can't get the petrochemical feedstocks that they need to produce their products. So that, again, is going to lead to higher prices. It's going to lead to perhaps scarcity of some goods. And even if you stop the war today, even if you announce that the Strait of Hormuz is open and there are no tolls and ships are safe to use the strait, the consequences of this closure are going to be with us, I think, for much of this year and perhaps even into 2027.
Yeah. And the damage to actual plants that were hit by these targets in the war. To talk to me a little bit about the countries in the. I mean, this peace was also, or maybe it wasn't also, supposed to be a deal that constrained Israel and Lebanon. It's not clear that the Israelis and Hezbollah have stopped fighting in any real way. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And then there's some really bizarre, like the UAE and again, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I knew there were tensions before, but they seem to have grown enormously. Can you just talk about what's happened to the Americans think the Gulf is the Gulf and they're all the same. That is like not close to true. I'd love you to help unravel that.
It's not true. And you've seen at various points throughout the war and the ceasefire, you've seen a real divergence in the positions of Gulf countries, where on one end of the spectrum you had Oman, which has been against the war since the beginning and has often sounded almost sympathetic to the Iranians, whereas a country like the UAE, which has been attacked thousands of times by Iran during the war, has been attacked more than any other country in the region, until recently sounded extremely hawkish on Iran, was urging the Trump administration to continue the war, to keep fighting until the regime was either overthrown or hobbled. There has been a shift in recent days. I would say all of the Gulf countries are now pretty much aligned when it comes to the war. They have all lost faith in the Trump administration. They have lost faith in the idea that there's going to be some sort of positive change in Iran, and they're very worried about what another round of fighting would mean in terms of damage to their infrastructure and their economies. And so all of them, including the UAE, this week have been urging Trump not to resume fighting, to make some sort of a deal with the Iranians. They're worried about what that deal is going to look like. They're worried that it might empower the regime in Tehran, but they think that is a less bad option than resuming the war.
Mm-hmm. And Israel and the UAE have grown closer during this conflict, but their needs with regard to Iran are very different.
They've grown much closer. I mean, we've had Israeli air defense systems deployed in the UAE, manned by Israeli personnel, shooting down Iranian missiles and drones. Unheard of for Israel to do that in a foreign country, certainly for an Arab country to permit and encourage Israel to do that. So this is it's a profound shift in Israel's relations with at least one of the countries in the Gulf. So they have grown closer, and it's part of a broader, I think, outreach that all of the Gulf states are doing right now, where they are nervous about America as their security guarantor. This country that was supposed to protect them ended up dragging the whole region into a war. And so they are looking for other middle powers now to align with, to try and protect them. The Saudis have a defense pact with Pakistan. There are now Pakistani troops stationed in Saudi Arabia. Qatar is trying to deepen its defense ties with Turkey. The UAE, not just with Israel, but with South Korea. They've been buying a lot of South Korean weapons over the past few months, and their defense relationship is growing tighter. So they're all scrambling for new allies. They can't replace the United States with any one of these countries, but they are looking to hedge, to diversify their relationships.
Yeah, all of which says to me the United States is in a worse position in the world than it was before this began. I mean, is that debatable anymore? Or, I mean, have the United States' relationships been, am I wrong to think they've been deeply damaged?
No, I don't think that's wrong at all. I think America's standing in the Middle East, America's relationships with its allies in the Arab world have been damaged by this, again, because they've been dragged into this war against their will. I think you have American allies in other parts of the world, in Asia, for example, where we've seen the most severe impact from this energy shock in countries like India, where there are shortages of cooking gas, for example, right? And so countries like this, I think, are furious with the Trump administration for dragging their economies through this crisis. Countries in Europe are not just opposed to the war, but they're also frustrated now because they have ordered weapons from the U.S. They've made deals to buy American defense kit. The Trump administration is now telling them, sorry, we can't deliver these things because we've used up these munitions in Iran, or we need to send these weapons to Gulf states instead of you. So the Europeans are annoyed about that. There are all of these second-order and third-order consequences that I think are doing real damage to America's standing in the world.
Yeah. I was going to get here later, but I'm going to do it now. So just turning to Europe for a second, with Trump reneging on the deals to sell arms to Europe, and on the other side of Europe, Russia appearing far weaker, Putin far weaker than he did 2 years ago or 3 years ago. That gives Europe both new opportunities and important new responsibilities in the world. Do you have any sense that they see both the opportunities and the responsibilities, and they're willing to step up?
I think they see the opportunities. Whether they're going to be able to seize those opportunities remains to be seen. But, again, if we look at countries in the Middle East that are looking for new friends right now, they are looking to the Europeans as well. The UK has had fighter jets stationed in Qatar since the beginning of the war. They've helped shoot down drones and missiles. The French have been doing something similar in the UAE. That's all been very well received. The Europeans are talking about contributing to some kind of a maritime mission in the Strait of Hormuz after the war ends, basically to reassure commercial shippers that it is safe to go back and forth through the strait. Again, that won't happen until the war ends. They don't want to get dragged into a conflict between the U.S. and Iran, but they are interested in doing that. And then you look at, what the Ukrainians have done over the past couple of months, where President Zelensky made a trip to the Gulf. He visited 3 Gulf countries. Ukraine has been sharing its expertise in shooting down drones with Gulf countries. And the drones that the Ukrainians are dealing with, these Shahed drones that Russia has deployed, they're originally Iranian drones, and they're the drones that Iran is using to attack the Gulf states. So that has been extremely well received in the Gulf, in countries that have tried to stay neutral on Russia's war in Ukraine over the past 4 years. But I think it's focused a lot of minds in the Gulf over the past few months. They've realized, on the one hand, the Ukrainians are helping us defend our skies. On the other hand, the Russians are providing targeting information to Iran to help Iran strike at targets in the Gulf. So particularly on this defense stuff, the Europeans are trying to play a bigger role in the region. The question is, will that be sustained, and how much more are they willing and able to do?
Yep. All right, I got to ask you about something that sounds crazy to me. And we've already been talking about things that are crazy, but reporting here says that Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu thought they would replace the Iranian regime with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Did you see that reporting? And do you have any sense that that's true?
So I did see it, and you're right to say it sounds crazy on its face. I mean, this is someone who, for a long time, was public enemy number 1 in Israel, is a fervent Holocaust denier, was in charge of Iran at a point when its nuclear program had become a really, really contentious issue. But I do believe it's true, actually. I mean, first, it's a well-sourced story by several very good journalists from the New York Times, but it also tracks with rumors that my colleagues and I had been hearing since quite early in the war, that Ahmadinejad has basically been under house arrest over the past few years because he's fallen afoul of the supreme leader and other elements in the regime. And so the rumors that we were hearing were that essentially Israel carried out a strike near his house, meant as a sort of jailbreak, right, to allow him to escape and go into hiding. And I do believe that there was a hope to install him as some sort of leader in Iran. Now, that was never going to work, right? It was an unrealistic idea from the start, the idea that one person could single-handedly take control of this regime the way Delcy Rodriguez did in Venezuela. That was rooted in a deep misunderstanding of Iranian politics. So it was a kooky idea from the start, but I do believe that it was the idea that the reporting is accurate.
Again, it wouldn't have worked in Iran, as you say, but I don't know. In Israel, it wouldn't have worked either. I mean, Bibi Netanyahu spent a decade telling everyone in Israel that Ahmadinejad wanted to take a nuclear weapon to Tel Aviv. I don't know how he would have sold that. None of it makes sense.
Well, I don't know how he would have sold that. I don't know how he's going to sell any of this. The war has become, I think, a very big liability for him at home. He's facing an election which has to happen by the end of October. It might be brought up and it might happen a little bit sooner than that. He had hoped to go into that election having won the war in Iran and being able to tell Israeli voters, we have vanquished our main state adversary. It's no longer a threat. Instead, he's going into that election with an indecisive outcome in Iran. What will look from an Israeli perspective like a very bad deal between the United States and Iran. At the same time, as you mentioned before, in Lebanon, still fighting Hezbollah there. There's nominally a ceasefire in place, but it's not being respected on either side. The fighting is continuing. Gaza remains an absolute disaster area 6 months after the ceasefire, and there's been no progress on disarming Hamas or trying to create some new government in Gaza. So all of these wars look very inconclusive, and that's not a good thing for Netanyahu heading into the next election.
And it looks to me, and I may be reading the tea leaves too closely, I'd love your thoughts on this, that Donald Trump, who was an enabler of some of Bibi Netanyahu's worst instincts, with his board of peace, he was going to solve Gaza, and 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 he went arm in arm with him into Iran. Um, it looks like there's some strategic separation going on. I'm reading reports that say, oh, you know what, it was Americans' missiles that were defending Israel, not the Iron Dome. And so the depletion of American stocks happened defending Israel. And none of that messaging helps. A, it may be true, and that's very curious. And B, it certainly doesn't help Bibi Netanyahu.
It doesn't help Netanyahu, and it doesn't help Israel as a country in the long run. I mean, it's been interesting to me to look at polls of public opinion in the United States. We did a survey a while back where we asked Americans who think is going to benefit from the war in Iran. Will Israel benefit? Will the United States, Russia, China, et cetera, et cetera? And more Americans, significantly more Americans, thought Israel would benefit than the United States. It was something like 55% thought Israel would benefit. Only about 30% of Americans thought America would benefit. So this idea, which seems to be widespread, that America was fighting a war for the benefit of some other country, but not for the benefit of the United States, I think in the long term, that is going to be a real problem for Israel's standing in Washington, for its standing more broadly in the U.S. I think there's going to be a significant long-term impact from this.
Yeah, I do too. All right, I have one other topic, and it's a little off message, but your magazine is called The Economist, after all. I wonder if you have any thoughts, because we've seen a lot of it used by folks related to this war, on crypto. It's being used to launder an awful lot of money. And it's also being used to make the Trump family fabulously wealthy. So we're not regulating it in any meaningful way. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about or information about how it's been used in the war and by folks over there.
Well, and I think this is one of the great ironies of this war and this moment in American politics. Cryptocurrency has been a lifeline for the Iranian regime. As you say, they have used it to launder money from overseas, to evade American sanctions. They have, in some cases, as they've tried to charge these tolls on ships passing through Hormuz, they've insisted on payment in cryptocurrency. Some captain on a tanker in the Persian Gulf has to come up with $2 million in stable coin and transfer it to the Revolutionary Guard to be allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. They've been doing it during the war, but they were also doing this before the war. It was a very convenient way for them to bypass sanctions. As you say, you would think that this would get the attention of people in the Treasury Department and the U.S. government, and they would want to crack down on crypto. But because the administration, because Trump and his family and Steve Witkoff, his Middle East envoy, and his family all have a vested interest in cryptocurrency firms, I don't think we've seen as aggressive of a campaign as we should. So at the same time as America is fighting a war against Iran, and Iran is using cryptocurrency to fund that war, we have an administration that is also profiting financially from crypto. It's ironic.
Ironic is one word for it, for sure. Yeah. I mean, we have our soldiers are being targeted by Russian intelligence, and the president says, we do the same to them. But he hasn't been outraged by that, hasn't decided to even release the weapons that we have promised Ukraine. So a very, very frustrating time. And you're in Washington, where the Senate is run on vacation, the House is run off on vacation, both a little bit early because they were uncomfortable with votes they were supposed to cast, but they were politically unpopular. So does that happen in other countries where legislative bodies, when they get a tough vote, they decide to go on vacation instead?
Well, I mean, in the countries that I cover, you tend not to have legislative bodies,
Yeah,
so
right,
I'm
that's
not
true.
sure that I can.
Yeah,
I'm not
right.
sure that I could speak to that.
That's
But
right.
no, I
That's
mean, it was
exactly.
remarkable this week. The vote in the House, not just that they ran off on vacation, but they had a series of votes scheduled on Thursday. The last of which was meant to be a War Powers Act vote, and there
Yep.
was a possibility after it cleared the Senate that it was going to clear the House, right? So my understanding is the House started going through the first few votes, which were symbolic, naming a post office or things like
Yep.
that. And they got to the last of those pre-War Powers votes, and they realized, there are several representatives who aren't here, right? There are absences, so we don't have the whole Republican caucus here. We're going to lose. And so they gavelled out. In the middle of this series of votes, they just decided to adjourn for the day and then go off on a long vacation. I mean, the level of political cowardice and the abrogation of the constitutional prerogative to declare war, which is Congress's prerogative. It's shocking.
Shocking. Well, I'm afraid that has to be our last word because we're out of time. Gregg, your reporting is fabulous. Tell everybody where they can find it.
It's at economist.com or, of course, in the weekly edition, the weekly print edition.
Yeah, I urge all of you to read The Economist. It's fabulous. But Gregg's work in particular is it's very important right now. Thank you, Gregg. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me.